Hey, dude, bandits, welcome to Bad Boy Running. We are not going to sing for you tonight because we're going to crack on with our guests straight away. You've probably heard of Kate several times, either in the group or on the podcast throughout the years, actually, originally appearing as someone who was banned from, I think, triathlon for drinking on the course, or Ironman or something like that. But since then, she's gone on to run 100 marathons, was it 99, in 100 days, but done it in probably the most foolhardy way, while also working. So we wanted to get an idea of just exactly how hard that was, because it looked horrific from where we were. So welcome to the podcast, the lovely Kate Jayden.
Hey! I can't believe I've finally gone from the joining Bad Boy Running on Facebook, because I'd heard that some people were chatting about me after I got disqualified from an Ironman race because I had a pint midway around the bike course, to now you've got me on the podcast. I feel like I've
all it takes.
Life.
All it takes is 100 marathons. It's that cheap.
Never mind. This is it. This is what we're here for. Bad Boy Running. Actually,
because that's the thing. Even before this challenge, you, in my head, you were always doing some pretty nuts, just distance on top of each other, back to back. Like, when did you actually first start going further than most?
I mean, let's be honest. I think it was never started out well when people say, "How did you start running?" And the story starts in a pub with a few too many pints. And I basically signed up to what I thought was a marathon, and that was my first ever real experience of running, to be honest. And I got home and I signed up for this marathon, and I was like, oh, so it seems like a really long way, 17 miles through England. Didn't think anything more of it. And then the next day I said, I think I might have signed up for a marathon last night. So what you think? And I was like, what? I did. And like, but you do know how far a marathon is, don't you? And it's like, what? It said 17 miles through England? No, Dave's run a marathon. Ask him. I'm pretty sure it's longer than that. He was actually called Dave as well, true story. And Dave, how far's a marathon? I've entered Chester and it says it's 17 miles through England. And he said, yeah, marathon's 26 miles. That's because the other 9 miles is through Wales. And that's how I learned how.
Oh, nice.
It was. And to be honest, then I started, like, it's always been a bit accidental, really. I then kind of, in my naivety, started my next experience of a marathon after my first one in October 2011. Ended up being, I'd applied a couple of times for London, and then I didn't get in when I applied that year. And you get the magazine, and if you don't know about marathons, and well, I certainly know now that an invite from Edinburgh Marathon on a poster does not make you special.
We especially selected you.
Well,
we've pre-selected you for a winner's medal
if you didn't get into London in this magazine. So next thing you know, before you knew it, I'd signed up to 5 marathons in 4 weeks, and I think it was partly through just, I'm sure it'll be fine. And
were you like Yes Man? You opened up the what's it called, the London Marathon magazine, just like, yeah, that one. Anyone I saw that I just signed up for.
Well, I think it started with, there was Manchester and Edinburgh, and I'd said, well, if I don't get into London, I'll do Paris. So I'd signed up to Paris anyway, and then next thing you know, I'd got like 4 in a month, and I kind of said to myself, well, I might as well make this into a fundraising thing, hadn't I? And so after my first starting running 3 months earlier, I then ran 12 marathons in 2012, in 12 months, and it was a slippery slope. And it didn't take me too long to figure out that ultras were where it was at, really. What
was your first ultra then?
Well, I did Rat Race the Wall. That was my first go at an ultra. And I was like, oh, this is quite fun, actually, because once you hit about 40 miles, this feels quite nice. And that was when, like, I kind of started realising there's this fun part that when everyone else is a bit knackered, you can kind of have a bit of fun then. And then I decided I'd like to have a go at a 24-hour, and that was Thunder Run. And it didn't go to plan. I got a bit of heat stroke, and I think I might have spewed up every single tree in Catton Woods that year. and other things that what happens in Catton Woods stays in Catton Woods. But then I decided that, a bit cooler, and then I did Equinox in 2014 and I accidentally won it, basically. And I just thought, well, I'll just keep running as long as I can and see what happens, as long as I get further than I did at Thunder Run, then that's a win to me. And there were some actual other runners there as well. It wasn't just there was me and one other person, or me and two other people. And then I kind of liked it. There's something quite fun about flogging yourself silly, and just there's that point past endurance as well, isn't there, when it just becomes attrition. And that's what this was all about this year. It went from, this is quite fun actually, to it's a bit hard, to Jesus, is it over yet? Like, just absolute attrition. Like, what else can I stick back together and tape back on? And it, like, honestly, it was absolutely how not to do it. If you were to compare people doing the same challenge, that was how not to do it. 100%, 0 out of 10 on TripAdvisor. Do not recommend. Don't try this at home.
Because when was it first in your head that this is something you wanted to try and achieve?
Well, do you know what? Like, it actually didn't start out as 100 marathons in 100 days. So it started out with, there's the Centurion One Slam. So when the lockdowns happened, Gareth Allen and I started this bit of a thing. It just started by accident, really. We kind of thought, like, there was the One Slam week, and you can pick 5k, 10k, half marathon, 50k, 50 miles or 100 miles, and you do it over the week. Well, we kind of figured that you could sign up to every single distance, and it works out, I think it was 250 miles, basically. That was, well, no, I think it was 200 miles the first time, because they added in the 100k afterwards. And so we kind of started, this just became a thing. I don't know how it became a thing. So we did that a couple of years in a row. And then last year there was the One Slam, which replicates the idea that, that you could either pick from 200 miles based on the 4 times 50. You could pick the 400 miles, which was based on the 4 100 milers. Or you could pick the 1,000 miler, which was based on, like, putting the two together or something. And so Gareth and I chatted about this back in the autumn last year. And we realised that when we added it all up, and we included that peak week of like 250 miles as well, it came out at 2,592 miles over 100 days. And we both sort of virtually looked at each other and went, well, we started it, it's become a thing. So, but I like to blame him for that. But yeah, I decided that I was going to fundraise for a refugee charity, and whenever I'm left alone with Google Maps, it's just a dangerous move. That's how I've got into some of my past challenges. And I realised pretty quickly the distance from Aleppo in Syria to Dover in the UK was about 100 marathons. And then I just said, well, it'd be rude not to round it up to 2,620 miles, really. So the idea was originally we were just going to run that as an average across the 100 days. And
because doing those type of challenges, that's very different to doing races or doing a 24-hour Equinox or whatever the race may be, in that you've got no real external support, like visibly support, and there isn't that reward in the same way. It's far more anonymous. Like, do you equate those two? Are they as joyful for you as, and are they as hard and as easy as each other for you?
I think they both have different challenges, and I definitely think I used to place more onus on the former. And then when 2020 kind of came along to just mess up all of our plans, I remember I'd never ran a marathon distance as a training run. That had never occurred to me to do that. And I remember deciding to do an accumulator. So for anybody who doesn't know, it's basically, the 1st of March, it was May. So the 1st of May, you'd run a mile. 2nd of May, you run 2 miles, right through to the 31st of May, where you run 31 miles. But this one had to be done a single run. So it's Mark Cobain's accumulator. And you had to do it as a single run. You had to do it every day. And again, that was just something I did around work whilst I was working from home. And it's fine until you get to the last week. And I think that just totally changed my idea of where the reward was. And I think now, certainly now, and I think things changed as I trained for faster times as well. I think when I started wanting to achieve better times in marathons, you know, like good for age times and looking at a Boston time and things like that, I didn't really see the point in paying 40 quid for a piece of metal and a training run and the petrol that goes with it and all the associated other stuff. And I think there is something quite rewarding that you don't have that recognition from other people. You don't have that's when it's a real test, I think. You know, a lot of people think, oh well, it's just a virtual event, it's not that hard. But actually, I think a lot of times it's a lot harder. You know, you've not got an aid station in your marathon. You've got to carry a backpack with everything in it if you're doing an outdoor run. So I think they both have their different challenges. I definitely think, you know, I do still, I'm a big fan of a city marathon, you know, with the big crowds. I don't have to carry a backpack. I can just take a gel and I can just run too fast and inevitably blow up at about mile 22 and grip on for dear life and hope for the best. I think there's a lot of fun in that too. But yeah, quite the contrast.
So then in terms of the hundreds, did you tell people in your office and people from work and did you start by telling everyone I'm doing 100? Because that's quite a lot of pressure, but also in terms of work, you know you're going to have people watching you and your performance throughout.
I mean, let's just say I've got a very understanding employer. I think my work know that it's part of my job is managing client firms. So long as you talk to your client firms, you build those relationships with firms, and they know what's to be expected when things are going to be delivered. And you know, you're not taking the mick. It was a huge challenge. You know, I would literally wake up in the morning, and the second half was where the challenge really started with work. The first half wasn't so bad. But the second half, you know, when the day runs over in the day job and you have to get that finished, inevitably what happens is you'd have to wake up earlier and start work earlier than 8 o'clock in the morning. So my work hours in the second half of the challenge were 8 until 4 p.m. And so I would shut the laptop at probably about 4:30, sometimes 5, quickly take my feet up, get myself together and get on the treadmill to usually finish by a few minutes before midnight or quarter to midnight, sometimes 11:30, depending what a car crash it was that night, to be honest. So it started out with, I'm just going to run the distance from Aleppo to Dover and I'm going to raise some money for charity. It was never about a world record. It was never actually originally 100 marathons in 100 days. It was this mileage over that period of time. But the reason it turned into the 100 days was, you know, we were in the Christmas holidays, and that's when you realise how long it's been when you look back. And it was New Year's Eve that I actually, technically the 100 days started on New Year's Day. So we're in the Christmas holidays still, but I'd done a marathon on New Year's Eve because I'd done the double at Liverbird. So I'd already got that marathon on New Year's Eve. So that's where the extra one came from to make it 101 in the end. And to be honest, the only reason, I'm the worst athlete. The only reason I did them as single runs for the first 4 days was to get it over and done with. So I could get home and carry on eating cheese and chocolate. That was literally the only reason I did them as single runs to begin with. It wasn't because I wanted to run a marathon. I just wanted to go home and eat cheese again. And then a few people in a running group said, well, you know, if you just carry on doing them as single runs, like it was that simple. But naively, I thought, oh, okay, you'll break the world record. And I remember actually going, do you know what? I think I remember reading about that record and being surprised that it was no longer just official events that you could achieve that record in. So I think part of the attraction for turning it into that, partly the British public really love to see people suffer, and they'll give you loads of money for charity when you do that. So suddenly it was a really, really good way to get more money for the charities that I was fundraising for, which was quite handy, really, given that was the whole point of it.
And was the plan to have it always on the treadmill then for
No,
just
no.
convenience? Or
No, actually, the plan was to do as many of them outside as possible, really, because let's be honest, running a marathon on a treadmill, I grew to quite love it, to be honest, in the end. I think there are weird pros and cons of both. But when you're in the Peak District and you're getting absolutely battered by yet another storm with yet another name.
It's a particularly difficult period, wasn't it, to run outside?
It was. Everything was just ridiculous. It was like a circus, and I was the ringmaster, except all of the animals and the acrobats were on fire, and I was watching them on fire and didn't bother putting it out. And then I was on fire. And the whole thing was on fire. It was just an absolute, if you ever needed proof that this never set out as a world record attempt, this was it. I was working full time. I picked the worst time of year to do it in. The worst time of year in the sense that our wedding is next weekend. So we got married in the pandemic. We only had the service, and we said we'd do it a year later.
Yeah.
So, that's the time you're supposed to be doing wedding planning.
So what did your day look like then? So what time were you? The thing is, so you said that you didn't so much, but kind of plan to do it. So did you kind of start off like getting up early, running, and then doing it, or did you start off in the evening and do it, or did it change? Like what would your day look like at the start compared to what your day looked like at the end?
I might have smiled in the first few days, and the last ones I would quite often have a very big ugly cry. So it set out the first few days. Obviously, we're in the Christmas holidays, and that gave me a gauge on what worst case scenario would be. Because when you're doing back-to-back marathon days, inevitably, say for example, you do a 10 in 10 or 7 in 7 or something like that. Usually, I think once you get past day 3 or 4, that's when it starts to turn around, and that's when typically things tend to loosen off and it tends to get better. So I knew at that point, if I allowed 5 hours each morning for me to be back just in time to log on to my computer, still in my marathon kit, it'd be fine because I could have a shower at lunch. But as long as I was back home for work. So I would get up about 4:45, get out to run the marathons, and I realised that, worst case scenario, probably about 4:30. So I would typically start running about 5:15 a.m, nip out, do the marathon, come home, start work. And it just became the normal thing. It was just nip out for a marathon, do the day job, eat dinner in the evening. And it was quite normal. It was quite okay. But day 47, I had a couple of niggles across, but you kind of expect that, something hurts, give it a couple of days, it'll stop complaining, and then it goes away. But day 47, I couldn't weight bear on my knee. I've never had an issue with my knees ever in my entire life. To be fair, I
bet you've never run 47 marathons back to back up to that point as well.
Exactly. Never ran 47 marathons. But I say that as a bit of a surprise because I've done a number of really stupid things that if you were going to get injured, you would think you probably would have. So I'd done 20 marathons in 17 days. I'd ran from London to Paris in 4 days, and that was 252 miles. I'd done a Deca, which was 10 Ironmans in 10 days, and a whole bunch of really stupid
There's a lot of rest.
things
There's a lot of rest
theory,
on those ones, aren't there? Though there's a lot of resting between running and all that on an Ironman, though, isn't there?
Yeah. You get a nice little swim and a bike before, so
exactly.
You get to mess about for a few hours before. So yeah, you're right. Yeah, fair point. But yeah, I'd done some stupid stuff before, so the one thing that I was very, very good at was being very aware of what was right and not right, and knowing what I could push through and what I couldn't push through and that sort of thing. And I think when you get into really long endurance stuff, you have a real deep affinity of knowing what you can push through and what you get to know your body in a really odd sort of way as to the exact sort of aches and pains or slight feelings in certain places, or the certain hot spots that you get with your feet, or weird places you chafe and stuff like that.
But what would happen because you don't really have much of a choice other than to push through? So how would you adapt if you felt that something happened?
Well, day 47 was that day it happened. I couldn't stand on it. There was a point where I didn't dare tell anybody I was walking from my bedroom to the toilet on crutches. And I was still managing to do a marathon because basically...
Do you have crutches at home ready for that?
Well, I had them in. No, didn't buy them in advance of this. No, by chance, we just kept hold of them. Amazingly, I still had them. And I thought, well, the thing is, if you bought a pair of crutches, because I had this like bruising on my heel bone like in 2017 in January, and I just happened to have them. And so I was like, do you know what? I can't actually stand on this knee. And I thought, okay, what I'll do is I'll just do the most criminal thing to a bad boy running podcast. And I went, forgive me, guys, for I sinned. I got on the watt bike for 20 minutes. And I thought if I could get the joint moving and get it sort of, you know, loosened up and lubed and all that, and it sort of worked. And then I got onto the treadmill and started walking. And then eventually I could do a bit of a run walk. So the first couple of days, I said, luckily it happened on a Saturday. Like there's ever a lucky in that situation. So I could just walk slowly. And if it took me 8 or 9 hours, then that's how long it would take. And all I had to do was finish it before midnight. Luckily, my ego didn't go before me. I wasn't precious about the fact that I'd ran a 3-hour 34 like 3 weeks earlier. And now I was potentially going to run 8 hours or walk. It was a walk. As it happened, I ended up figuring out a routine over the next few days where I would walk the first 3 miles, and then eventually that would loosen it up enough that I could sort of run walk the rest. So the first half of that challenge, the first like 47 days, averaged sub 4 every day. So the first 10 days I eased into it, and then day 10 I went sub 4, and then I stayed there pretty much to day 47 with the odd exception, you know, a bit over. The second half, it was basically 6.5 hours every day. And that
what was your partner saying? Because that would be the thing that I think if Claire saw me on crutches getting onto a bike, she'd just pull me out. She'd realise like this is too much.
Yeah. So we spoke about it seriously that day, and we said, right, this might be the end of this. But equally, the thing that kept coming back is it's not impossible until it's impossible. You don't actually know it's impossible until you know that. So it might hurt now, but the key thing that I'd said was if this got any worse, it would absolutely get canned. If I thought there was a chance that it was going to be, you know, a fracture or something like that, or that it was going to get progressively worse, then I would absolutely stop. So Laura and I had a chat and we said, right, going forward, this is down to me now. I will know if I need to stop this. But if something's happened, it's happened now anyway. So if it gets worse, we'll stop. If it stays as it is, you know, then that's okay. But that was when we got a physio involved as well.
What does the physio say? What does the physio say at that point?
Yeah.
Right. Well, first, you find yourself a physio that swears like an absolute trooper, is based in Preston, a proper northerner for a start. I just said to her, I was like, look, here's the deal. She's like, look, mate, I'm not going to tell you to stop. I know what you're doing, and I'm not going to tell you to stop. I'll see if I can patch you up. And basically, if you're acting like a dick, I'll tell you to stop. And that was the deal. And you can't really find out what it is until you stop and you rest it, because you need that couple of weeks afterwards to see what the actual problem is once it's rested. So she did a bunch of witchcraft magic with, like, you know, there was some dry needling, I started taping and all sorts of stuff. And the long and short of it was, over the next couple of weeks, it was a bit of a battle, to say the least. And I think it was day 63 that was the absolute worst day. When people say which was the worst day 63, and I absolutely remember it clear as day. I remember what I was wearing. I remember the exact way the ground looked. I remember the exact point where I thought, I don't think I'm going to make it at midnight. But I also remember the exact point that my mind said, right, but if you don't carry on, you won't know, will you? So you might make it up a bit later on. But if it takes you to 23:59:59, then you'll damn well carry on. because it's not about you, it's not about your ego, and it's not really about whether it hurts or not, because it was always going to hurt, let's be honest. So that was the worst day. And then things actually...
What time did you come in that day?
7 hours, basically. I think the move...
Oh, no, I mean, in terms of the clock.
23:57.
Oh, you had loads of time. You take it easy last few minutes.
I think I had... there were a few days like that. I think, like, partly between managing the job and then getting on the treadmill and still managing a 6.5 hour marathon. You never knew what time it was going to take you until you started. So it might take 5:50, might take 6:45. So it was always a bit Russian roulette until you knew. So I basically spent the second half of that challenge going, don't know how much longer it's going to carry on for, but we've got another day finished and you can't start the next day until you finish this day. But yeah, that was, I think once I'd hit day 63, I mean, just to put it into perspective, the reason that seemed so impossible, the first mile, not even walking, right? The first mile was figuring out how I could weight bear. The first mile took me 32.5 minutes.
Wow. And what are you doing with your legs and your arms in that mile?
Looking a bit like I'm in need of help. Let's put it this way, right? So when I was in the office working, that's when I would have to do the marathon straight from work because I didn't have the time to commute home. So the first half was easy. The second half, I would work 8 until 4 at home. And then I would typically get on the treadmill because running in the Peak District, when it's pitch black, you don't really have many roads to use. There aren't footpaths where I live. I have one 5-mile loop, which has 500 foot of elevation on it. And I have the flat trail, and a marathon on that will give you about 1,300 foot. So that's my pancake flat route. And so it wasn't really feasible to be going out and running a marathon every night when it was that cold and it's that isolated and there's no phone signal if anything goes wrong. So that was when the treadmill kind of became a necessity more so than anything. And then the ones after work, though, so I would commute to work. This is how much of an absolute hero my wife is, though, right? She would drive me to work in Manchester, drop me off for the day, and then she would come back when I was finishing work so she could be there to get everything ready to start the marathon, bring all like the bag and the drinks, and basically she would bunny hop in the car on this like route that I'd do 3 laps of. And basically I would get asked on that marathon in the earlier days of the second half, do you need a lift? No, thank you. Are you okay, love? Yeah, I'm fine, mate. Are you? And it just became a bit of a because I did look like an absolute like ministry of comedy walks, because my arm was like, this is the ridiculous thing. By the end of this, the definition on my top right and the top of my right arm was so much more pronounced than my left arm. Because basically what was happening to keep my balance is my right arm would sort of hook back over really quickly to try and, because I wasn't, yeah. So I'd get asked probably, I think I clocked the most was 8 times in one marathon if I needed a lift or if I was okay. And there was one point at the end of one of these runs where I just turned around and I was like, yes, I'm fine. If I needed help, I would ask you. I'm sure you're trying to be lovely, but please leave me alone. Yeah.
What happens to your because you mentioned the change there, like what else happens to your body? Does your muscle definition like dramatically change from leg to leg, arm to arm? Are you dropping weight? Are you feeling very different? Or
stayed roughly the same, and the reason we tracked that was because we wanted to make sure that I wasn't losing weight. Also because of the meds that I'm on, it can be a little bit too easy to lose weight, that sort of thing. So we have to keep track of my weight on not too regular basis, but just checking on it every now and then. But my weight stayed within about 1 kilo to 2 kilos throughout. And it was only in that end part of it where it dropped the extra kilo. So basically 1 kilo is what? It's a big poo, isn't it? Like it's It's like is it a pound, £2 or something? A couple of pounds. Like, I can fluctuate that much in a day. So yeah, we kept track of it. So my weight stayed roughly the same, but my body shape really changed.
Oh,
so
really?
I went from looking slim. So I went into this, probably like a size 8 on the top, 10 on the bottom, women's clothes, to 6 and an 8. And so the size of me and the shape of me changed a lot. But my weight stayed roughly the same. So I was constantly having these conversations with people like, oh God, you've lost so much weight. And I'm like, well, actually, no, I haven't. My weight's actually the same. It's just that I've had a bit of body recomposition. So I've just lost a bit of fat. So it looks to you like I've lost weight, but I actually haven't lost weight in the technical sense of it. So,
What were you eating then? Like, and how did that change? Like, what because I imagine that even getting the amount of food that you need in each day, again, that's another logistical element that you have to kind of think about, and cost of that as well.
Well, my wife owns a village shop, so my wife owns a village shop.
Okay.
I married. I was sensible.
You're getting all the discount
This is
food.
tactical. This is a tactical marriage. This is very, very impressive.
So she comes home, but it's fine when you're running a marathon every day. But because she comes home and she's like, "Hey babe, would you like which one of these 6 chocolate bars?" Fine when you're running a marathon every day, not so much when you're not. But yeah, so the food cost, actually, we were really lucky. We get a lot of the leftovers from the shop and stuff like that, so it didn't make a huge difference. But I already knew that on a day where I run a marathon and don't do anything else, and I'm relatively sedentary, that my calorie expenditure is 4,000.
Right.
And so I know typically I burn, whether I take 6.5 hours or 3.5 hours, it's usually about 100 calories a mile. I do fit that algorithm fairly neatly. So it was quite simple getting the calories in, actually. You'd be surprised, it's not hard to eat 4,000 calories at all.
But I mean, that seems quite low to me, actually, like, as a number, because a lot of even if you just look at the mileage, some people would burn 3,000 calories just from the running, let alone the 2,000 to 3,000 that you'd normally have.
The common misconception with that, though, is that most people forget about your base metabolic calories. So if you're running for 6 hours or run walking for 6 hours, you don't get 2,500 calories plus your 2,000 for the day. So 2,000 for the day, for example, is your daily requirement. And actually, a lot of people probably don't even need that when they're sedentary. Hence why it's quite easy to put on weight when you don't really tend to do much activity. But if you are sedentary, you don't typically need 2,000, as I say. So the common misconception is for those 4 hours, you still have the other calories on top of it, but you don't. That's all together for those 4 hours. So it's then the rest of the day, 1,400 calories. And if you've ever tracked, heart rate, and I geek out a lot on that sort of stuff. So I was quite au fait with exactly what I needed to do with nutrition and, all of that sort of stuff. Knew what I needed to do with recovery as well, but completely ignored that, clearly.
And what does it do to your sleep patterns?
Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fucked it right up. Absolutely fucked up. For a start, so the first half wasn't too bad because you wake up early, you run a marathon, try not to fall asleep at your desk for the first half of the morning, ease into the day, it's all good, you finish your work day, and then you can go to bed at a normal time. But the second half, basically, by the time you finish and get off, you press stop on the treadmill at maybe a few minutes before midnight, then you get downstairs, you have to do the recovery things, so the hot bath, Epsom salts, and then I would wear like compression boots, the air compression boots.
Oh yeah.
And all that sort of stuff. So I would typically be going to sleep at about 2 in the morning. That's a sleep habit that was designed for me in my 20s, and even that was questionable. I am not built for it anymore. I'm in my mid-30s, and I'm the wrong side of my mid-30s now. I actually eventually got used to it, though. So before this, was a hardened 8 hours of sleep a night without fail. And I absolutely advocate this best way for recovery. It's the best way to help yourself stay injury-free and all of those things. It just doesn't work while you're working full-time and running a marathon every day. particularly if you're basically injured whilst you're doing that. Don't run while you're injured. Disclaimer, blah, blah, blah. So you sleep. If it wasn't for the fact that there was a long period of that, where after finishing the marathon on the treadmill, I would go to sleep, and this went on for until about a week and a half from the end, and even then it was still intermittent. So it would have been about like 6 weeks or something. Every single night, I would dream that I was running a marathon on the treadmill, and in time for me waking up, it would be the time of finishing the marathon.
Would your legs be moving when you're dreaming?
Just honestly, and obviously, so you obviously then every now and then get the, you know, when you wake yourself up because you've tripped off a curb. And yeah, it just, so I was dosing right up on magnesium to try and help with restless legs, but I actually have restless leg syndrome. So, you know, after a really, really long run, a lot of runners complain of getting restless legs and they can't, it's really difficult to describe. Well, I have that just day to day. And
yeah, same.
I take a medication for it that was prescribed because it got so bad that it was impacting sleep and me being able to do anything in the evenings away from home and stuff. And so luckily between that, but even that wasn't enough at one point. So I was dosing up on magnesium to help with it and iron and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, basically I was dreaming that I was running a marathon every night. I was probably getting maybe 4 to 6 hours a night. 6 hours was an absolute daydream of a sleep. That was jackpot of a night's sleep. So by the time I finished, my sleep's still a bit of a shit show now, to be honest. You know, I think that's going to take time, but that kind of happens when you do a long multi-day event where you've ended up in this cycle of sleep deprivation. I mean, the really great thing is, you know, I'm not so exhausted now that I just cry at everything. So that's a bonus.
So was that happening just at the end or throughout?
Oh, honestly, so you can just imagine. So most people, when they're tired anyway, get a bit crabby. Now, I'm going to be brutally honest, and I'm sure there'll be people that will absolutely rip the piss out of me for this because I do it myself, right? But let's just add in the reality of that I'm on the autistic spectrum. So add in a few autistic meltdowns. Sometimes when you're in the middle of the street in Manchester and it just looks like you're a grown adult having a bloody tantrum. And then on top of that, half an hour later, you just cry because you were tired. I've never had so much snot running down my face. And I was so grateful to finish because everything, like, you'd have a few good days and then it was just like all hell would let loose.
But how does that affect your relationship when you're reliant on your wife, really, to be delivering things, to be supporting you?
It was hard. I'm not going to lie. I think anybody who it tested us at points, but I think, to be honest, when you've been through what we've been through with my in-laws, you know, actually this, you know, we've been through worse, so this isn't so bad. But I'll be honest, I was an absolute dick at times through this challenge because I was basically like a crabby little toddler. And then on top of that, you know, as much as I joke about it, you know, the meltdowns on top of that, what that actually looks like, it's pretty shit. You know, I hate the fact that people call autism a superpower because, do you know what? It actually really belittles the fact that, you know, the job insecurity and the things that people don't talk about because it's a bit embarrassing. But, you know, one thing I learned in this challenge was that I needed to try and be a bit more open about things because actually, for example, when I would be running with somebody, I found myself having to say to them, look, this is how things are looking at the minute. So they were aware. And so, for example, the biggest thing that I found was the sensory overload of things. So if you've ever read anything about the autistic spectrum and people who have autism, it will impact all sorts of different people in different ways. But I remember just being really honest one day on one of my social media posts because I documented the journey as I went through, and actually it really helped for people following it and donating to charity. And there was one day I remember posting that actually the very real honesty of this is that if I'm outside and it's windy, one of the worst things for me running outside is the wind, if it's a really strong wind. And I can only describe it as it is really, really distressing. And the way it feels, and it's like it's an assault on the senses, and it's exhausting. And so not only are you trying to work a day job and run marathons, and you're then trying to somehow find just a moment of peace and quiet every now and then to just get yourself back together again. But I was willing to do that. I knew that this would happen. I knew that there'd be times if it was outdoors, there would be sensory issues. I knew that indoors there would be sensory issues because you've got a bloody fan blowing in your face. Who do you think you are, Beyonce? No, let's be honest.
And
that's the reality of it. But
I just wait. There's two things I want to ask you about work, because I think the whole thing is fucking insane as it is. It's just the fact that you have to work as well, and like I think the thing you made an incredible point. I think in your social post as well is that there are other people who are now going through this, but they're not. A lot of them are. They don't have to do anything else during the day. The fact that you're having to work. So, firstly, how was your productivity? How did you measure that? What was it like towards the end of the thing? And secondly, what was the reaction to the people that you work with? Of course, they're very supportive, but after, say, halfway through the challenge, does it just become painfully boring? Does no one talk about it because you're just like, I've got nothing to say about this anymore? Like, how's the challenge going? Or, does it just get complicated or awkward or what? Or how did that journey pan out?
Yeah, so I think at the start, I mean, to be fair, I can't praise my employers enough. I mean, on the honesty side and the making yourself vulnerable, honestly, I've never been more grateful. It's the first time I had an employer where I didn't feel vulnerable in the sense of employment and losing my job at any point. And if you speak to anybody who is, who has ADHD or is on the spectrum, you'll often find the biggest thing is employment security. So firstly, I was just so damn grateful that it was the first time I'd felt settled in work in 36 years, and I'd been in this industry for a very long time, very competent at my job. But on top of that, they were actually really enthusiastic about it. They actually included regular updates on this. So they put it on their own Twitter. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is
were you there, Howard from the Halifax? Is that
what?
Were you there, Howard from the Halifax?
I think they must have thought that at one point. They were actually really lovely. Do you know what? They sent like emails out, and they would include it in like the weekly email to clients and stuff. So they ended up being the really weird part is where your work life and this like person that people know about me doing these really stupid things, because it like word kind of spreads. People go, oh yeah, Kate did the thing, didn't she? And there ends up being this weird crossover with financial services and runners. Quite a lot of financial services and financial advisors are also runners, it turns out.
There's a lot that are triathletes. Triathletes is an accountant's game.
Yeah, but I think like when I started coming into work on the crutches, because the
they must have gone, what are you kidding?
God, wow.
Yeah, you can imagine, like, it was just hilarious. It's just like, I said to him, I was like, it's basically to keep, and then my boss, do you know what? He is the nicest guy. He actually, so he did like the sort of boss talk, but like lovely talk of, yeah, but you're more important than any record, you know that? And I was like, I don't care about the record, to be honest. That's just a bit of a red herring for the fundraising. Don't get me wrong. I'm doing the 26.2 miles. I'm finishing it before midnight. I'm doing them all as single runs. I'm recording them. I'm doing all the data log. I'm doing that. Is being done. But for me, whether I get that or not, whatever. But I explained why I was doing it and what the real driver was, and he got it. And he's so lovely. But like you have like this. It's so hard to explain because you have like these people that see like the runner part of me, and then there's the work part of me. And it's almost like you live these two full-time lives. So you've got like a full-time, and certainly in the last 2 years, I have trained at times like a full-time athlete and carried on working as well. So even before I did the 100 in 100, I was training for 35 hours, 40 hours a week on top of my job. 20 hours a week was basically my rest week. But yeah, towards the end, I think like when they started seeing me on crutches, it just became the normal thing of, I think they must have just thought I wasn't doing it anymore. So people were like, oh,
But what, they were just embarrassed to go, oh, you're not doing it anymore, because they didn't want to kind of like bring it up? Or...
Well, no, the funny thing was, quite a few of them would be like, oh, I guess that's your marathon stopped. And I'd be like, no. And they'd be like, what? Yeah.
Every day you come in, you made all of them feel pathetic with their lives. Is that...
Don't. It felt so harsh so many times. The amount of people that were like, well, I couldn't quit on my run today because you were doing another marathon. And I was like, soz.
That's why your manager loved it. The quality, the fitness of the entire office rose. The sickness days went down. Productivity went up.
I mean, the only plus side, because I was working from home 3 days a week, and one of the days a week that I was in the office, I was usually delivering a training session via webinar all day. So luckily, actually, people didn't tend to see me very often. But every now and then, people would ask me like, oh, how are you? And I never really know how to answer that question. So I usually answer with, yeah. So I just ran my 67th marathon today, and I did it. Apparently, that's how you're supposed to answer that question. When it's not 100 marathons, it's a fairly identical reaction. But yeah, they did kind of, towards the end even, actually, lots of people still messaged to say, like, they just thought it was amazing. And I am really lucky that I work for such a lovely office and there's such a good bunch of people. You know, there's a couple of runners, but they were all just amazed that I was doing this. And then when they realised what I was doing, that I was still doing it. And even though it was taking me 6.5 hours instead of 3.5 hours, 4 hours, it became a different kind of impressive. So, you know, the first half of the challenge impressed one group of runners. And then the second half was, I think even I was a little bit impressed by the second half, to be honest, because the only moral of that story was that I'm a dead hard bastard. Do you know what I mean?
Let's get down to the truth of it. I am. Well, the other thing I want to ask you about is when these things happen, because there's always, at any one point, there's always people claiming they're going to be doing things like these. And so I think, don't the media really wait right until the last minute when it looks like you're going to be doing those things to kind of get involved? Yeah. And then also, and there's also normally a correlation between the majority of the fundraising comes in the last few days or after that. Is that what you found as well with this?
Yeah, so the one thing that I have always said is that I have basically taken fundraising, taken the emotion out of it, and I've autisticed it, and I've turned it into a process that I can do quite well at. So I know all of those quirks. I know what time to do my social media posts. I know how to do social media posts, and all those little weird quirks around social media that you just learn because they're just patterns in people's behaviours. But right down to the fact that I knew exactly there were certain mile marks. You know, there were certain, like 50. I knew that there'd be a good spike in fundraising then. And I knew in the last sort of 10 days, I'd always said to Laura, I was like, oh, no, this is completely normal. I said, in the last 10 days, it will start building. You'll see an almost like accelerating increase in the fundraising. And then it was right at the last minute when the press finally got interested in it. But the funniest thing about the way the press got interested in this afterwards was it's just the whole, like, the way all of this is gone, it's just a bit of a joke, really. Like, it's quite funny how it happened. It wasn't because anyone got me, like, you know, a contact at ITV News to send a camera around to the house. I mean, what the actual fuck? I was like, babe, you might need to come home. ITV want to send a cameraman round to the house. And then she came home and they were like, yeah, she's like, yeah, they were emailing me. They were going to send a satellite van. And it was like, what? And we just laughed at the whole thing. The reason it ended up, it exploded temporarily for a week. And it just, like, it was on ITV, it was in the Times. And I was just like, what the hell happened? And what happened was BBC East Midlands had written an article. And so when we left Brighton on Tuesday morning to come back home, we were just like, yeah, I've done a local newspaper article, and we've done, a couple of local BBC. So we had BBC Radio Derby had done a really nice piece, and BBC East Midlands had written a piece. They were the ones that did the original one early on. And it was that article. The only reason anybody else got interested was because what happened, that was a local BBC article. It got read so much that it was on the top 10 on the landing page on the main BBC News website.
Oh, wow.
And then it overtook Britney Spears' news that she was having a baby. And there was one point when someone texted and they were like, mate, you were on the top 10 on the most news read earlier on the main BBC website, and you were number 1 at one point. And I was like, why didn't you get me a screenshot of that? But it was just...
And was that naturally happening, or were you trying to encourage that through methods, or...
So earlier on, we'd done a lot to try and get any interest from the press, but they're just... Typically, people aren't really interested until you get towards the end of the challenge. That's just the way it is, because...
Yeah, it makes sense, really,
especially when the second you add the words world record attempt, even I'm just like, whatever. Do you know what? Even I'm just like, yeah, all right, give it 60 days, come back, we'll see how it gets on. So that typically tends to be the way it was. So actually, all the mainstream stuff that happened was a bit just because so many people read the article. I'd shared it, and I actually noticed that with my own social media I tended to use Facebook more because it tends to be more successful for fundraising. On my athlete page there, that kind of snowballed in terms of the reach with the posts. But the funniest thing was, there was one video that went viral by mistake. We don't know how it happened. We actually think this video probably went it was one of the early ones in like the first few weeks. And we had this bit of a joke, me and my wife, where it started on day 5, and I just finished the snowiest all hells marathon. And I just ran up, paused my car, and she's like, and she filmed the absolute, so trolled by my own wife. She filmed and she said, how far did you run, babe? I turned around and said, marathon. Good job. And that was the video. And that just became a bit of a thing. Anyway, there was this one post on Facebook. And it's ended up with about 3.5 million views. And the reach on it was like, I think almost 5 million or something. And we just went, how did that happen? And we think it actually started, ironically, through being posted by a bunch of racists. Because there is nothing more like a red rag bubble than a dyke fundraising for people that they constitute on. It's absolute
brilliant positioning there.
It's just great. Do you know what I mean? Because there is nothing worse than, there is a stereotype, and I hate to say it because I've encountered a lot of it, and it's fairly accurate. And it's when you look at a racist on Twitter as you imagine it, I hate to say it, but it's a cishet white man who has and we call it the racist starter kit. So you've got St. George's Cross somewhere in your Facebook profile or Twitter. A picture with you with, not beer, let's be clear, we're not talking IPA here. Stella or Carling or something like that. Or a picture with your top off, or a picture at the football or something like that. And it's the racist starter pack. And Twitter had a load of those. And we actually think it correlated at the same time. I was getting a bunch of racists that hate, there's nothing worse. It was brilliant because we just kind of sat back and laughed at it. But equally, it was really sad that people were so angry that I was...
Were there a lot of messages then beneath the post? And
yeah, so on some of them have gone, but we didn't delete anything. We left it there because, let people see the true colours of people that are like that. But on that post, I was called all sorts, from I looked terminally ill, I need a steak, I need to eat more food. I was told that I've ran right of my makeup, so I need some mascara. All sorts of personal derogatory comments about the way
you need to eat more food.
No. There was one guy though. One guy was like, "You need a burrito," and I was like, "Cool. When are you making them? When do you want my address? Make mine a veggie one, please." So you just learn to have fun with these trolls. The ironic thing is, some of these people were so stupid that they'd be like, how can I stop this post? And I'll be like, well, I'll tell you what, my first top tip is not to comment on it, because now you're going to get notifications every time somebody comments on it. And then every now and then you'd get somebody that would comment, hi, just dropping in to put a comment on here so all of the racists get a notification. But yeah, it was weird. I always find it really weird how so many people just suddenly get an interest in this weird sort of journey that you go on. And the funny thing was, the running actually was kind of a bit of a byproduct of the whole thing. It started...
Because how much does it raise now then?
I checked the other day, and now it's settled down, and it's 38,500, including the gift. Yeah.
And do you think, because I guess the issue with doing 100 marathons is that there's a high risk that you never get to that point where everyone opens their wallet?
I think, to be honest, there's so many opportunities on that journey. Actually, what happened is you found we had multiple people give multiple times, and people were really generous. I know that there's one, a bad boy runner, actually. He not only did he donate at the very outset £50 or something, which is a generous donation as it is, but then when I reached 50 miles, he donated another £100 or something. And then every time I brought out something new. So the other thing with a long duration of fundraising, so you're talking when the whole event is days, you have to get creative with it. So for example, we had, when it was how far have you run, babe, that became a fundraising thing, because it would be, we'd convert it into, for example, what somebody wanted a marathon measured in. So there was one point where someone said, can you measure that marathon in how long my dog is, please? And he donated 50 quid to the page for me to do it. And I was like, cool. And we made a joke that it was I'm not singing Dancing Monkey, put a coin in the machine and I would dance for you, no problem. And you've just got to be pretty ruthless, to be honest. 38.5 grand. I think about 7 grand of that was after the event finished. And it was because I basically gave hours and hours and hours of my time to interviews, news articles, local press. And that sort of stuff, you'd usually ask for a fee for that. And to be honest, I think I managed to get 2 fees agreed, and they will be going directly to the charity when the people pay them. But for the amount of time, I think I probably gave, when I calculated it all up at one point, because we were talking about the cost of your time and the fact that you are giving time to somebody who will make money from your time. And so I was brutally honest about that with people. And I'd say, look, I'm giving you my time for free. I'm not asking you for a fee. I'm asking you for a charitable donation. And if you can't do that, I'm asking you to pay me the fee that you would pay me so I can donate that myself. I think it must have been over 40 hours, possibly 50.
And so that makes a good point actually about the when you finished, what happened then? How, all of a sudden you have these large chunks of time back. Did you immediately try filling them with other stuff? And what was your what was your recovery? What has been your recovery? What have you done to? Because this was the point that you said when everything then calms down, your body starts to recover. And what emerged at that point?
So I'll be honest. The first week to 2 weeks, I didn't get a chance because my feet just didn't touch the ground, because I was constantly, still before and after work, whether it was writing an interview, recording a podcast, or doing some sort of written up thing or sending pictures. That was just absolutely relentless for 2 weeks. Hence why we knew that it was about 50 hours thinking about it, because it was basically the same level of time. And that was how we calculated it in terms of the returns on it. And so my feet didn't touch the ground for the first week. So it felt like there wasn't that moment of silence. And I always say, after a huge, huge challenge like that, where you've pushed yourself right to the absolute edge of possibility, whether that's, your first marathon, your first 5K, your first 100 miles, whatever that challenge is, it's all relative to that person. And the amount of effort and training that's gone into it, not always the case, but, when you put a long period of your life into something, I always say there's that moment you'll often find afterwards where the silence is deafening. And it is so silent And it's like all of a sudden you've gone from doing this amazing thing. And for me, there was this huge element of knowing that I was doing something that was making a difference to the things that were happening in the world. You know, I was raising money for a refugee charity. I was raising money for a food banks charity. And I was raising money for a hygiene bank charity. And when you spent the last 100 days, the running was one part of that. Because I think probably the other thing that people don't realise is the amount of effort that I put into researching these topics whilst I was doing all of this, so I could construct these posts and talk about these topics for people and get them to hear them more and get them to talk about it more. And so after you've gone from feeling like you have been doing something to make a difference, that is this overwhelming sense of, and I remember saying, like, in Brighton Marathon a few times as I came towards the end, there were quite a few people that say, oh, I've been following the journey, and I just found myself like completely overwhelmed by it. And I said, you know what? Never let anybody tell you that you can't make a difference. And so you spend 3 months of your life. I can't even begin to explain how that feels. I think you can only ever understand it when, I think the one good thing about me starting on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, was that it was a very clear picture for people to understand as to what you'd committed. Because when I said to somebody, I said, I have gone from turkey and tinsel, so we don't get tofurkey anymore, but, you know, tofu and tinsel, to daffodils and lambs. I've gone from seeing the weather and the season change. I've gone from seeing these huge oak trees ripped out of the ground and cast on the floor with no leaves, and the winter and the snow, to flowers and warmth. I've literally had to change the way I dress in that time. You know, the shorts came back out. And when you realise how much time you've committed to that and why more than anything, and you stop, that I didn't try and fill the gaps. Actually, it's only really this week, I think, finally I've heard that silence. And I think last weekend there was a really blue day and there was a hard day, because I'd always said to Laura, I said, the thing with this, so Laura runs and she does a bit of the criminal stuff, you know, the bit of the triathlon, messing about. And I'd always said to her, because, and this is where being very, very in tune with the way all of the psychology as well as the physical stuff works, is that at the end of this, we need to be really, really careful to just keep my mental health in check.
Yeah.
Because knowing how long this has been, knowing how much it meant to me, the passion as to why I was doing this, and suddenly not having that anymore, it's like a grieving process almost. And you feel like you've lost something, and it's something that you've loved, you've built, you've put your time and your effort, and you've made yourself so. The bit that made this journey, I think, so it got so many people involved and so engaged in it, was the fact that actually I allowed myself to be raw and vulnerable and honest about that journey. Because the truth is, sorry, my cat's just at the scratching post. Nice way to ruin the moment. Thanks.
Classic
the
cat.
Truth is, you know, I know, right? The truth is, you know, you can document this journey by saying on Instagram, ran a marathon today. But, you know, and then you can go further and say, this is how I've been dealing with this. So I was always really open about, like, how long my times were. I was open about, like, where I'd done them, how I'd done them. I was open about nutrition. Anything that anybody asked me, I always answered. That there's going even further beyond that. And it's saying, you know, like, Laura did a lot of my updates at one point. You know, she's been really, really involved in the whole thing. She didn't watch. She wasn't a passive a passive observer of this. She's been totally involved. We've done this as a team. So all throughout, I keep finding myself saying, we. And I'm like, I hope people don't think this is me being a bit of a weird pronoun sort of thing. It's not they, them, we. Me, but I talk about team. So, yeah. Got a long way to go with pronouns, but there was one point, like, do you think I need to clarify that for people, that we isn't to do with the pronouns, that, like, we is
I will never refer to any of my victories as a we. It's always me. I'm the one that's achieved everything. That will never. But how would you? How are you? I mean,
I wouldn't have.
There's two. Right, so there's two more things I want to ask you. Okay, so firstly, Do you think you could have done it without that purpose? If you had to run 100 days and you weren't raising money, do you think you could? Do you think you could have done it? And then the second thing is, no, actually, answer the first thing first.
Yeah, because meds have worn off now, and I have capacity to forget the first question. Honestly, I've thought about this quite a few times. If it weren't for the fact that, for me, this was actually a form of activism, when we've spoken about this to so many people and we dissected it afterwards, there is a huge part of this. You know, when people say, I'm raising awareness of.
Yeah.
Well, we all know about cancer. We don't need to raise awareness of. So what are you doing beyond that? Are you teaching us about the experiences of chemo? Are you teaching us about this? Are you teaching about... So when I said I was raising awareness, it literally became a bit of a form of activism. And the truth is, without the fundraising and how much I care so much about that, I honestly don't give too much of a toss about a world record to have kept me going. I mean, it's epic knowing that you're doing something that, you know, is up there, but it's never been something that really drives me. Every time I've gone to set a record or break a record, I've never actually said anything like, I'm a world record holder, because I'm not, because I've never had them verified. I've broken records. And even with this, I don't say I'm a world record holder because it's not mine. It's still Alyssa's. And that's really, really important. I always correct people about that. And I'm like, no, I surpassed the record that was set, and I've broken that, and I've gone through all manner of data documentation. But that would take a long time to actually get verified. And the reality is, I have never bothered applying because it never motivated me enough. If I didn't have that, I don't think I would have made it. But I've always been very, very clear in the way that I approach these challenges. Every time you've heard about me doing something ridiculous again, it's always been for a purpose.
Yeah.
So I tend to decide who I want to fundraise for, and then pick the challenge to that. So, for example, using this and the journey of a refugee from Syria to the UK, no, I absolutely wouldn't, because I mean, I hate myself, but I don't hate myself enough that much to just do this for a world record.
Okay, so then the second, oh hello. So the second question then, and I think I know the answer to this already. So, how are you going to feel when, or if, someone else surpasses it then?
If what?
Well, eventually someone will surpass it. How will you feel when someone else surpasses the record?
It is what it is. It's going to happen. But the reality is, I think that, firstly, the way you conduct yourself during that journey says a lot. And actually, you know, I mean, we could spend hours talking about this, but there was an instant in this journey where I showed good sportsmanship to somebody where I could have just ignored their mistake that they'd made. And I didn't. It would have benefited me if I had have ignored it and let them make the mistake. So I think there's definitely something to say about the way you conduct yourself, you know, in terms of you've got to take that. And you know what? I learned so much from the way Alyssa treated me. And actually the way, so when I knew that I was going to pass Alyssa's record, I messaged her before. And I said, I just wanted you to know that, you know, on this day, I'll basically pass your record. And I've always from the start said, you know, I really admire what you've done, because you didn't just break the record. You went and hiked that up to such, like, she took it to this huge bar above and beyond. And so, I messaged her right from the start, and I said, a bit like you, I didn't intend to set out as a record, but here I find myself, you know. And then when it came to the day that I was going to exceed it, I messaged her and I just said, I just wanted to reach out and let you know that, you know, I'm still doing this, because she wasn't following me at that point. I was following her on Instagram. But tomorrow's the day where I'll pass the record, and I didn't want it to feel like I was being brash about that if lots of other people shared information about the record being broken, because it just feels a bit like shoving it in somebody's face, and it's where good sportsmanship comes into play, really. And actually, I think we had mutual respect for each other, and that she was so kind. She sent me a lovely message, and then she actually asked if she could share my charity page as well. And she wrote this lovely post about records are there to be broken, and the new marathon queen is Kate, and wear your crown with pride, or something like that. And it was just like, it was everything that was good in running, and I sent her some lovely words back. There was a bit of fangirling on my behalf, and I think it's really important to actually recognise those people that set those records before you. I don't expect people to do that with me, because I've broken the record, but until it's verified, I think it's much for much. It's still Alyssa's record until otherwise told. So it will happen. There will be somebody who exceeds 101, and I don't think it'll be that long. I know it won't be long, but the reality is, unless you're really, really transparent, you're not really going to have an idea as to how likely that is to get verified. And it's verification that matters. It's one thing saying you're going to do something. I think we've all seen the stories of people attempting world records and say, they go out Billy Big Bollocks and I'm going to break a world record, and then there's something that comes out in the wash that's just a bit dodgy, and then it all unravels like Cora Byung. No, but on a serious note, I just think like we've all seen too much of it, and I think I'll be the first person to say, I've passed it, and it was a great challenge. If it gets verified, that's great, but we're in the process of uploading hundreds of hours of videos, so it's not a short process. And I'll
don't want to fall foul of Derek, do you? Whatever happens, Derek's BDI on you.
You know what? The one thing that I've always done throughout this is I've always been super transparent, because do you know what? Be honest, be upfront, allow people to follow you on Strava. All my runs were public. I have always had everything out there. I've posted pictures. When it's been done on the treadmill, I've not only showed the distance on the Garmin, but I've shown the distance on the treadmill as well, because let's be honest, Garmin's are pretty unreliable at running on the treadmill, even when calibrated. But I think put everything out there and answer people's questions, because, they're not always skeptics. Sometimes people are just interested.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, congratulations on surpassing the record, whether that, as you say, is then
destroying the record
by Guinness.
I think so much as, to be honest, I think I walked past it with a bit of a key and I went
you keyed the record.
I put a dent in it.
Nice.
She smashed the shit out of it. I put a small dent.
And congratulations on raising so much as well. That's just an incredible amount of money to have raised. So
is the fundraising
coming the podcast finally, and good luck with.
Is the fundraising page easy to? Is the fundraising page got an easy name to remember, or are we posting a link for that?
But no, because we don't have the whole like Virgin Money giving thing anymore for split charities. It's donate, give, live. But it's on my bio on Instagram. And that's not a fish for followers. You don't have to follow me. Just go and click on my profile, click on the charity link, and you never have to look at my Instagram profile again if you don't like.
And what's your Instagram profile name?
I was about to completely forget to give you that. At Kate Jayden, DECA, as in Decker, that dirty triathlon word.
Oh, I see.
And Jayden, Jayden.
Jayden, yeah. So pop along to there, or on Facebook, it's Kate Jayden Endurance Athlete. And that's where all the updates were posted and everything, and the link will be in one of the most recent posts on there as well.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, and congratulations on an incredible effort.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Our pleasure. Cheers, Kate.
Cheers, guys.